Hello, I'm Jemie Sae Koo, CEO and founder of Psychable. With over 1.5 million visitors to date, Psychable.com is the leading online community committed to empowering individuals interested in legally exploring the healing potential of psychedelic assisted therapy. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Wallace Murray. He is a coach, a psychotherapist, and a mental health consultant who runs his own practice. He's also the founder of Modern Growth Medicine and part of the founding team of Get Sober program. Wallace, welcome.
Thank you for having me today. I feel honored.
Thank you for being here with us. I was wondering if you could start off by sharing with our audience your background, your upbringing, and the path that led you to working with psychedelic assisted therapy.
Wow. Okay, that's a big and broad question. Well, I'm Canadian, and I'm originally from the province of Saskatchewan. So I grew up there. I was born in the south, and actually in 𝐿𝐿𝐶 territory, and I grew up in Saskatoon, and I was blessed to have grown up in an area that's inner city and full of lots of evidence of intergenerational trauma, both in the broader population as well as among our First Nations. So I feel blessed because I think it impacted me in many ways, and also I got to gain a lot of wisdom and learnings and insights that not everyone gets to have. So, and I know it's influenced my work today. So anyway, that's where I'm originally from. I did my first degree there. And then from there, quick background, I've traveled the world a lot. I lived in a variety of places working from Mexico to Japan, and both places living, over a year. And then also living throughout Canada. I lived out in Quebec for quite a while, and I've traveled a lot of different parts of the world. Today, I presently live in the Okanagan, South Okanagan of British Columbia, in the desert, which is where I need to be at present, and spent a lot of years in the Vancouver area. In terms of my practice now, it's been a bit of a road. In terms of my studies, I'd say my first studies in psychology, it was in applied linguistics and applied psychology. And then I was a teacher, and I specialized in, I did a lot of teaching English as a second language way back in the day, and then morphed it into kind of a broader, and then upgraded my skills and different things in psychology and coaching. And presently, I've specialized in two things. One is, since 2013, trauma, especially working with people with different trauma, as well as non-ordinary states of consciousness. So hypnotherapy, and then doing different somatic therapies. I was lucky enough to do the compassionate inquiry practitioner, developed by quite a famous guy in the field called Dr. Gabor Mate. And then went from there, learning some other things, DBR, and now just completed 2 certificates, an advanced certificate in psychedelic therapy training with 𝐼𝐚𝐿𝐵𝐾, based in Calgary, Alberta, as well as I just finished a micro program at the University of Ottawa in psychedelic studies. And my next step is to do masters. I have some ideas around areas that I wish to explore further in the field.
Wow, that's quite a background.
Yeah,
I was just
yeah,
curious, what got you into the work of not working with non-ordinary states of consciousness?
yeah. So one's life and studies encompass lots of things. So I was lucky enough. I've been blessed, really blessed, for whatever reason. I don't know why creators or invited me. I was lucky enough to work with Balian. They're Balians in Bali. They're like the knowledge keepers of Bali. So I was not lucky enough to work with them, and I was also lucky enough to have been mentored by a couple of Cree knowledge keepers as well, in Canada. And because of that, I got access. I was allowed, and I participated in ceremony. And in ceremony is a non-ordinary state of consciousness, and I can absolutely tell you that these ceremonies are as non-ordinary state of consciousness as a psychedelic experience. Absolutely, when done in the right setting and the right knowledge keeper, et cetera, okay, night facilitator, whatever you want to call it. So, and that's what got me involved. And then in 2013, my dad passed. So I got to spend a lot of time with him. I was doing a lot of that type of work. And then that work, being with him, especially the last 31 days in palliative, I got to be around death. So I was there all the time, slept there sometimes, and I was literally around people passing. So I was also learned, what's going on when people pass. I got to see them pass in peace and some in anger and different things. And I also got trained by a knowledge keeper who assisted with death. So I got to learn elements and different ways of being and approaches and things. So, and honestly, when people are passing, they're between worlds, and there is a non-ordinary state of consciousness going on. So I was lucky enough to have done that as well. It had great influence on me and has great influence on my work. And today, my whole approach is about what's going on between the conscious and non-conscious, and to broaden that, what's going on between ourselves and the greater spirit world and all the relationships going on. So it's kind of down and out.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
powerful. I was
yeah.
wondering if you can actually talk and expand a little bit more around your process and approach with a client who comes to you seeking support around psychedelic assisted therapy.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So the first thing I'll do is, well, I'll let them know I'm not a traditional talk therapist. That's the first thing. So I get referrals that way. I'll ask them first off why why are they looking for psychedelics or what's going on? Often it's for integrative work. So there's two. One is they're thinking about it, or they've been told that it's really helpful. They read an article. And my approach isn't about, oh, do you have depression? Take this. The latest study, ketamine is great for treatment resistant depression. Go run to a ketamine clinic. I ask them why they want to do that, and I get to know their background a little bit. Are they from a certain culture of origin? Are they familiar with ceremony? What's going on with them? And are they presently using, to see if they maybe have a relationship with something now, or did something come to them in a dream? And these are common questions. As you probably know, if you go to communities that use plant medicines, these are questions people ask, right? Did different plants speak to you? And maybe they spoke to them. So I ask those sorts of questions to see what's going on and where they're at. Personally, that happened with me, where I had to get guidance on some things that were happening with me, where I almost went down the road with peyote, and I went down a road with ayahuasca instead. And I think those are important conversations, not done in the clinical space necessarily all the time. So that's one thing I do. And the other, if they've already had an experience, I find out more about what happened. Often because they didn't work with anyone, and we often in the modern world don't have our members, our community, our elders, different things to help us. They often, people do an experience and boom, and suddenly they're taken to an experience that is challenging. So they didn't know how to be in that experience. They were never shown, so they didn't have any pre-work or therapeutic work of how to do that. Two is they weren't expecting that, or maybe they're with friends and someone ran into the forest. These are all true stories that have come to me and people phone me. So what I do is we unpack it. I have a process for that. It's called discovery process. And I see what's going on in their thinking, but I also bring them into what's going on in feelings, bodily sensations, and emotions. And I take them back fully to associate back into that experience. And we kind of go through it again and see kind of what happened. And with that and their experience, we start to see, hey, what happened? What's the perception on that? And oftentimes there's agreement between us that, hey, I'm taking a holiday from any psychedelics. And we go down a journey of figuring out kind of what's going on with them. And by doing that, the next time they then look at or think about doing psychedelics, the approach is completely different, which means they may not do a psychedelic. They may decide to do something later. They may decide, you know what, I want to work with someone who can be with me on this journey and knows what they're doing. So that means going to a clinic. It may mean going to a jurisdiction where it's legal, So for example, mushrooms are, Amsterdam or Jamaica, two great places there. They may go down to a place in uh, Peru or Colombia where ayahuasca or yahe is legal, and they'll work with proper teams. The approach is different, and the reason they can do that is because they're different by going through that process. And I think that's a really critical thing, especially right now, with all the debates going on and everything. That relational piece is often neglected, and you'll see it in clinical trials, and which are so important, and I read them and everything, but they're leaving out sometimes those pieces, except if you go to people that are in anthropology or linguistics or philosophy, or they're in that space, but they're from a different background, so they can intersect and take a different approach. And that's kind of how I do it. Yeah. I hope
Right.
that answers your question.
Yeah, it actually leads me to my next question. How do
Hmm.
you see the intersection between ancient healing methods and modern therapeutic approaches utilizing psychedelics and other plant medicines?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to acknowledge, much like we do land acknowledgement, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of um, the throughout the planet, we're talking of indigenous communities working with and being in relationship with these plants and learning from them how they can help us and have millennia of safety passing blood-brain barriers. So I want to acknowledge that right now. Um, and so today we have, I think it's a way, we, our modern view of medicine is very biochemical. And let's call it, do a study and you know, uh, this drug, oh, this drug can help depression, help some people in studies. Let's give it to everybody, and we take it and there's some side effects. But it totally neglects what's going on with that person outside of that doctor's office or psychiatry office, meaning what's going on with them spiritually, what's going on in the whole constellation of their life, their background, their everything that is the uniqueness of them, often neglected. So I think that's something that they haven't quite figured out how to intersect. Um, I follow approach. It's a two-eyed approach in all my work, where one eye is and one eye is in the modern Western methods. So I read, why I study what I do, and everything else. And then the other eye is in these indigenous, ancient, old world, old knowledge of these things. And you use those two eyes and you communicate back and forth, like any relationship. And from there, discoveries are made. I know if you look at citizen science by guys like Stamets, uh, you know, participatory action research, as well as indigenous ways of meaning collection, of collecting data, collecting meaning, you'll find how these drugs and different things work. So microdosing is a good example. Everyone's talking about the placebo effect with microdosing, meaning it's just a placebo, doesn't do much. That's true in a biochemical frame. But if you go beyond that and you go into things like, and there are researchers, the meaning response in local biologies, these are terms that are used, and you go among all those things, you realize that there's other things that influence and activate our pathways as much or more than those chemicals in that whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really important. The other thing is that all over the planet, and let's talk about the ones that we know that are Mexico and the Amazon and things from these medicines. They know that when there's dis-ease, that means there's something's unwell in the community.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And you're a symptom of that. So it's about not just about helping you, it's about helping the community and the community working together. We rarely, if ever, talk about that. So I'd like those things to intersect more. And there are some people wanting to do that. I'm an advocate for that. And I think we need to intersect and put all these ideas together and go slow to go fast with
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
I'm really struck by what you said. I mean, I think if I'm getting this correctly, it's by healing oneself, by healing yourself, you're also healing community.
Hmm. Yeah. In fact, I'll take it further that we have a shared DNA with all the plants, all the insects. Some would argue that we have a shared DNA with things seen and unseen. And that shared DNA, we have a connection of energy and all sorts of things between us. When we heal us, we help heal and connect with and make right our relationship with everything. And yeah, so and when I'll also mention this, that we're also, you hear a lot of talk, the shamans always say, or the elders always say, that you're also healing generations, that you're healing, behind you, but you're also healing ahead of you.
Mhm.
And I think that's really important as well. So when I say broader, it's about what's here in this world, but it's going to affect what's moving forward. And I think the whole field of epigenetics is about that. What
Mhm.
genes are activated and all of those things. Um, I think in the emerging medical models are including our uniqueness. They're looking at things like our genetics, how, and not just about psychedelics. How do we use vitamins? How does our body process things? How do we process fats? And all those types of things. And why are those things activated? Why are we having certain symptoms? Anyway, and that comes out in trauma. There's lots of whole body of research that talks about, um, when people have all these diagnoses and responses of anger and using addiction and using drugs, that it's just a response to being uncomfortable and discomfort. And it's a response of something that happened to them that they needed to find a solution for, a logical solution. And sometimes things like alcohol are fantastic friends to help you in that scenario and in that context when all the relationships around you are in disarray
Mm.
and really traumatic, and there's abuse and all these different things. So
Why, I'm
anyway,
curious why why you're naming that, in when things are disarray, that one can
mhm.
find a friend in alcohol. Can you expand a little bit more about that? Because I feel like
Sure.
there are a lot of people out there that are really struggling with that.
There are, yeah. I take a different approach to addictions, and not just alcohol. There's lots of addictions: gambling, overwork, sex. You name. There's lots. And but let's use alcohol. So here's a case in point. I had a client, and he was being abused, and his friend. I often bring people back. We go back to memories sometimes. Kind of, they're repressed, but they're ready to come out. And I think it was around, yeah, he was 12. So we went back, and yeah, and he was offered alcohol from a friend, and he was being abused by a family member. So he took the alcohol, and what does alcohol do? It makes you feel relaxed. Um, it takes away pain. You
Mhm.
feel on top of the world. Um, what a beautiful friend to take away from all that pain of that abuse, as well as the real pain. The real pain was that he was alone. He had no one to support him, meaning relationships to help support him. He was really alone. And at that age, you don't have the, um, we'll say the awareness of your body, of your brain, of your development of yourself to perhaps find another solution, especially depending on the context and where you're at. So in that case, it was a friend. It was a great friend. So, and they have a relationship with it. There's a deep relationship with it. So when I work with that, we work with the fact that maybe, much like a lot of different friendships, it might be time to let that friend go, or not spend as much time with it, or see it as a friend that's maybe ignorant or did their best, but they just don't have the capacity to help you anymore. And it's time to take agency and to bring up that part of you that got stuck. And then you're the new friend. And
That's quite
yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
I'm curious as a side question. Do you see
Mhm.
alcohol as a benevolent plant?
Well, there is, um, you know, people that are into, we'll say people that work with plants. there's a spirit attached with plants.
Mhm.
Alcohol is a spirit. There are people that are able to see things and do ceremonies and things like that, that do see the spirit, do see the energy with these alcoholic things. In that perspective, yes, in fact, I'm drinking coffee right now, and coffee itself has an in the plant world, those that see plants as entities and having spirits
Mhm.
and things, there's an essence in this coffee right now. There's something there, and I'm in relationship to it. I actually do have a relationship with coffee, and a new relationship. I used to be addicted to coffee. Now I have a new relationship with it. And so in that perspective, yes, there is an energy, there's an entity with it. And I think that if you approach it from that, there's respect there,
Mm.
and I then aid that person to have a conversation with it and actually release it. And what we often do is that I help, or I guide the person to let the spirit, their friend, go, meaning job's done.
Mm.
You know what? You're fired with love and compassion,
Mm.
and it's time for you to go elsewhere where you're needed somewhere else.
Mm.
And that's how I approach it. And that approach isn't something that was taught to me by people from old traditions, and I've seen it in very similar, but that's the essence of it, is that it's just a part.
Mm.
It's a and a spirit's there, and it's time to let them go.
Mhm.
And they played their job. The job's done.
But I'm curious from your perspective, like personally, I've never seen alcohol be a benevolent, good thing. I've seen it wreck a lot of people's lives, right? So,
It, absolutely. That's where it's an ignorant friend, meaning you saw it as a friend. It was a friend that took away that pain, but it
mm,
was an ignorant friend. Yeah, it does cause all those things. And that's part of helping a person see that, meaning new perception, seeing the truth of it
mhm,
and letting it go, just like you're in a toxic relationship.
mhm,
And there's some good things, but also some toxic things. And at some point you realize, wow, there's some toxic things here. And can you release it with love and compassion, and then take your next step forward in the life you're meant to live? And that's what it is. Absolutely, it does. So that, all addictions do: overwork, sex, gambling, etc. You name it, they all take a toll, and they also give relief from pain and from some truths that are really hard to bear.
mm, mhm,
And I'm lucky to be a witness, to work with people who are ready to face those truths
mhm,
and then move on and say goodbye to those things that were helping them in some capacities,
mhm.
but seeing the truth of what they've done, and moving in a new way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Thank you
curiosity
for raising that.
Yeah, yeah. The curiosity that comes up for me around chaotic usage with substances like alcohol is, how do you deal with clients who have a past with chaotic usage and that want to seek psychedelic assisted therapy to help break some of their chaotic usage, but is trepidatious because they're like, well, am I substituting one substance with another substance? Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
how would you sort of address like the differences of these plants and their healing potential?
Uh-huh. So I think it's there's be different models of it. A clinical model would say, okay, so psilocybin isn't addictive. Um, Ketamine can be, but used properly, it's, the studies show it's not. So these things do help people. Absolutely. MDMA will be, is being shown to be another, probably be legal in the next year or so. So these help.
Mhm,
I think the approach is really important. So um, in fact, seeing alcohol as a spirit, um, if you go that route, you probably won't drink hard stuff. You might have a little bit of beer or wine. You have a totally different relationship with it. You start to think about what it does in your body. How does it help? How does it not? What's the alcohol component? It's a different approach. So anyway, back to things that can be seen as addicted. So cannabis is a good example. A lot of people also use cannabis to relieve pain. It's
Right.
also a friend.
Mhm.
So the relationship with it was as this friend, keeping them from pain. But once they, and anything, any addiction, once you see what the relationship has been and what it's done for you, and also what it's doing negatively for you, can you release that relationship? When that relationship is reached, you no longer have this need you no longer have an addiction, because you now have a different relationship with your pain, the source of what was causing you to use that. Cannabis, and I'll use cannabis as an example, and I can speak about others, is used a lot with vets. It's being used very successfully today. And it's used successfully with PTSD. And when it's used in a way to help people relax, often their symptoms of complex PTSD, they can then start to get into the source of their trauma, etc., and relieve that. And from what I've seen, and I've also read, and it's quite interesting, I just read a study just published about cannabis, that people don't have those symptoms of depression, anxiety, and all those things, or they're significantly alleviated and consistently over time when they check back with them in 6 months and things like that. And they mention about the therapies, and I believe it's because the therapies that were used, which weren't traditional ones, but were often relational, they used internal family systems, a few others, helped get into a relational model. And therefore, there is no reason for the addiction, because you no longer have that source of pain. It's a different way of approaching it.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
But yeah.
Wallace, how do you address the stigma and the misconceptions around psychedelics,
Mhm.
cannabis use in therapeutic contexts?
Yeah, that's interesting. I find it interesting because people from different communities have different ways of looking at it. So, for example, um, cannabis. Cannabis has been a sacred plant, for example, with Shiva, for forever. With First Nation communities, it's a plant, and as a plant, as such, it's sacred, and there's medicine there. So if I talk to often First Nation communities or different communities, they don't have any stigma in that sense. Overall wide, I think we have some stigma because of the hippie culture, people using it to get high and disassociate, and and all those kinds of things. I just address it full on. I ask someone where they're coming from on this. If they do have stigma, I invite them to read more and learn more. I'm happy to share. I have, I don't know, 300 different studies I can share with people, and recent research, and I will share it, and I'll have people read it. That's one. With cannabis, I think it's changing a bit, because with a younger generation, they're getting used to a lot of different things. But an older generation, cannabis has been around for a while, and some of them are familiar with relaxing with it and things like that. And I find there isn't a stigma. Once there's a conversation about it, they're open to, wow, this could be maybe a medicine for me to get in touch with some of the symptoms or repression that I've been having, or disassociation, etc. Each case is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most important thing, is that each person is unique,
Yeah.
and figuring out where they're at first before an approach is needed. If that's done, the stigma kind of almost disappears. And luckily, we both know more and more information's coming out, and the stigma is getting less and less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. So it's really meeting the person where they're at, starting from that place first, and
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
more personalized approach, because there isn't a one size fits all solution to healing, right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I was
And
wondering.
there are clients that after a year, they say, you're studying psychedelic therapies? I say, yeah. And I don't mention it, because
Well,
that's not where they're at,
right, right.
until maybe a certain time they ask me a question, or I give them information. Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could share some success stories around individuals who have experienced significant healing and transformation through the usage of psychedelics or cannabis-assisted therapy.
Sure. Yeah. Well, cannabis, I can think of one 16-year-old boy, very background, significant, I mean, significant trauma and abuse, complex PTSD, um, medicated heavily, given, I don't know, I think it was about 5 different diagnostic labels. And he finally had enough. He said, I've had enough here. I give him credit. He said, I'm going to figure out cannabis. Once the decision was made that we would work with him on his cannabis, I saw profound changes in him, meaning he was able to, the cannabis helped him regulate. And for the first time, after about 6 months, he was able to converse and have conversations about himself and be um, open to having awareness or thinking about or feeling into what was going on into his body. That is significant for someone that's never been able to do that. And he also had the awareness because he wasn't so heavily medicated, and it led to a place where he could finally get some therapy. I recently had a conversation with someone who's a first responder, and sometimes they go through traumatic events like vets. That's why cannabis assisted therapy has been so common, and it's helped them be able to face things for the first time, to get in their body and feel into their feelings and get to the source of things. When people have very complex PTSD, that's sometimes a challenge, or it can take a long time where they feel relaxed enough to first go there. When I worked with people, and it will take 6 months before they're ready to really go into the body, depending on their background. And it helps speed up that process, which means helps their healing. It helps them heal faster. So that's very well known. It's done a lot. And other things, like I can see a bunch. I've witnessed it. I've witnessed people who've done a variety of things and come after. And because of what they went through in their experience, and we unpacked it, they significant changes, shedding of a shame or a guilt or a fear, an ability to have not be in the shame or in the anger, but to be in relationship with it, to have, I have anger, I have shame, and you know what? Here they are. I can feel them. Oh, they're coming up, and oh, okay, it's not overpowering me. In fact, maybe I'll take, oh yeah, that gave me some resilience as well. There's some real learnings here that make me unique and able to do great things on this planet. I can bring those things and move them forward. So the plant, these plants, anyway, I go between psychedelics and plant medicine. They are catalysts for transformation and growth, and they really do, if we take what they're giving us, can help us jump right in. So rather than I'll do an experience, or I'll bring someone and we'll get to the source, we'll go to age 2 and we'll take time to unpack. In a ceremony or dosing, they'll take 12 sessions and they'll take you through it in that dosing. So you'll be right out of, you won't have zigzag with shame or guilt or anything. If you ride it and you're ready for it, you'll go right on the other end. And you'll literally be ready to step forward. And this is a real key. Then what's the relationships going on then with whoever you're working with? And then it's time to examine, where are they going? What communities are they in? Are they in a toxic marriage? Or where are they going? Are they in poverty? You know, all these things also need to be discussed. It brings up all these discussions, which we often don't discuss enough.
Right.
So we're starting to, and all of those things I are brought up. So yeah, so I think that's really important. If not, they're going to struggle.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
if they, or they're going to do things like the guy who stormed the Capitol, the so-called shaman with, you know, he had done ayahuasca, and then he, in his environment, it reinforced different things that he had. It wasn't a healing, it was a catalyst for continuing with working from and behaving from a trauma. It was a trauma response.
Which I think
And
it's so important that you're addressing this, because I think that's where the concept of integration comes in, right? Because
uh-huh,
as you said, yes, psychedelics and plant medicine has a transformative experience to them. Really, also the hard work and the real transformation also starts the day after you do these heightened states of conscious experiences, right? So I was wondering if you
uh-huh,
could speak a little bit more about like integration. What does that mean to
sure.
you? Why is that so important? And also why is it that I can't just do, you know, an ayahuasca ceremony and a one and done thing and be healed and, be able to just have, thrive and have wellness in my life?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. A great question. Well, many people have done, let's say, ayahuasca, and others, they'll say that at some point you realize your life is ceremony. Your life is integration. You realize, wait, it's like I'm on this planet and it's about integrating learnings, learning the real truth of my life, who I am, and living my life from what's deep inside me and helping others. Just helping this planet before I go, kind of thing. Before I go home, we're all here to just be with each other and be in right relationship. And that's the real about integration. And you're right. A lot of people do it and they think, yeah, I'm healed. And they kind of maybe learned something or said, wow, my dad, I don't know, hit me because he was, I don't know, his dad was an angry guy. Okay. But what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your relationships? Where's the meaning in that? And let's explore that and how you're creating your life and how your responses may be coming from that. If that's never done, it was just a great trip. It was just, you were a psychonaut, but there's no meaning. There's nothing meaningful in
Mhm.
that experience unless you bring it into the relationship within yourself and within others. All since the dawn of since these plants started working with us, most communities understood that,
Mm.
and that's the integration work. And otherwise it's just meaning. It's not going to have deep meaning for you. You'll say, I had a great trip and I learned this. Okay, now what?
Right. And I think what you're alluding to is, how do you become the embodiment of
Uh-huh.
experiences that you're gleaning from, you know,
Yes.
these
Yeah,
psychedelic journeys.
absolutely. And we're still ourselves. We
Mhm.
gain some insights and the same things going on, meaning we're responding the same, or we're, no, I don't want to respond that way, but now what? So the integration work is about that, about, okay, I realized, I don't know, wow, I drink way too much. And I'm drinking because of deep shame I had growing up poor, for example. Um, okay, now, okay, now what's going on with this alcohol? How do I sit with my feelings when they come up now about my upbringing? How can I learn to do that through breath work, through mindfulness, through parts therapy? How can I, wow, I'm in relation with others. That might influence how I treat the environment. Maybe I get active and actually contribute or read more about global warming. Maybe I'm voting in a different way. Maybe I'm re-examining all my relationships. There's a lot. Yeah, integration, we can go on and on. It's a lifetime work.
Yeah. And I
Hmm.
really appreciate you saying that it's a lifetime work, because I think oftentimes people think that integration is just the talk therapy component. Whereas, even in my private practice, when I'm working with the clients, what I'm trying to explain to them, that it is a holistic approach. It is mind, body, soul, spirit, relationally, your environment, which you had touched on, detoxing all the chemicals out of your body, the parasites and all the muck
Yes,
muck
thank
that
you.
you've accrued over all the years. The choices in um, uh, the food that you consume, right?
Hmm.
The water that you drink, drinking clean water, breathing clean air, right? Like really
Hmm.
working on it in a holistic way, working on you in a holistic way. Because oftentimes what I say is that you can do all the talk therapy you want, but if your body is in constant inflammation, it's not exactly healing, right? You're not exactly healing your body. You can explore these
Yes.
emotional parts and all the traumas that are coming forth, but
Yes.
the work is a very holistic approach. So that
Yeah, no, in fact, you just the whole inspiration of why I started modern growth medicine,
perfect, yeah.
myself a naturopathic doctor, doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, bringing in a person who's a specialist with cannabis. Cannabis is amazing for inflammation.
Mhm.
Like that's just a fact. And you raised a good point that it is part of that. I'll use myself as an example. After my ceremonies, I went down a path where I had all my whole body genes analyzed and everything. And one of the things that came out for me is and actually I realized I was addicted to coffee. I used to drink like mad. Um, Doing that work, I now take I supplement with 𝐿-tyrosine. It's called 𝐿-tyrosine, my naturopathic doctor, and it helps regulate things and it works with me as a unique person. Now, you touch about inflammation. Absolutely. If you're in constant inflammation and you're in a high carb, a lot of people have gone through trauma, are addicted to sugar. I work tons of kids and people with trauma. They eat a lot of sugar
Which is
because they
also
learn.
a drug, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Is just changing that and maybe getting on proteins and fats will have a huge, as you know, a huge effect. So that was the whole inspiration of that, to work with people on all of those types of things
Cool.
and to approach all of that, because once again, all of your life is integration. The foods you eat, where you live, who you're in relationship, and how you approach things. Yeah, thank you. I can't say enough about that. Yeah.
I feel like we need you to come on another podcast or a master class specifically
We'll see. Yeah, yeah.
I was curious, when you were talking about helping people unpack, especially coming out of a psychedelic experience, this word safety comes up, right? Like, how do you ensure safe and supportive setting for somebody coming to you for integration?
Uh-huh. 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 Good question. I think one of the biggest things is there has to be uh there's a study that was done. It was published in 2012, I believe, APA, American Psychological Association. And the study basically, it's quite well known that no matter the approach, no matter the modality, the significant factor in whether someone goes down a healing path or not is the relationship between and this was the therapist and the person, the patient.
Mm-hmm.
That is key. So in that process that I mentioned about discovery, is I kind of tell them where we're going, and I constantly ask questions and permission from them. And it's really, and I let them know that my responsibility is their anger, sadness. All parts of them are welcome. They want to yell, they want to cry. You are welcome. You are welcome here. This is your place. The responsibility for how far they go is all on them. I'm with them to guide them as far as they wish to go. And I think that's that, starting in that way, and for people to know that and then showing them that as you go along that journey really builds up that safety and security for people to go to their truth wherever it is. I think that's vitally important in the post integration work.
Mm-hmm.
In the pre-work, I'll speak about studies and everything that's done. That's also very important if people are going to do, and they're doing this now, is that you prepare people for the journey they're going to undertake, for how they're going to breathe, how they can be in their body, how they can be with whatever experience, whatever vision, whatever memory, whatever comes up. I think that's vitally important. And that's what makes experiences, you mentioned about people just taking I'm cured. I can sometimes people go, oh, they took something and said it was great. I can tell you so many that did it and they were scared. They went to places, they said, one of the first people I worked with said, I'll never do ayahuasca again. It was so scary. But when we unpacked it, she realized, wow, there's so many beautiful learnings and teachings here. She was never prepared for having been able to maybe get those during the journey and then have that even be more of a catalyst for her healing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's quite.
You know, one of the things that is coming up for me is like even like on an ayahuasca journey, you can encounter demonic entities or what have you. So as you're talking about preparation, how do you prepare one to even, you know, be resourced when
Right,
encountering
right,
these scenarios if they, you know, come
right.
across
Ironically, in the modern world, we do. In traditional um, communities, in our indigenous communities throughout North South America, and I mentioned Baldy, for example, they know how. These are not foreign concepts. These are talked about and brought up and trained and mentored. So when you go into and it's shown in the studies where people that had certain backgrounds had totally different experiences with whatever came up in ceremony, including entities. Didn't freak them out. So I think just educating and speaking about those things, I think is important. Sharing your experience. I can share experiences working with children that have gone through significant trauma and abuse. I remember a 6-year-old, he would see with his brother that there were black entities hanging around him, and there
it.
were reasons those entities were there. He could see them. He was
Mhm.
young, and we did some work so they wouldn't have power over him, let's say, and he could tell them to respectfully go away. So we don't often talk about that, and also in the biochemical frame means. And in podcasts, they'll say, it's okay if people, let me rephrase that. I've heard people say, maybe we should talk about it's not okay that they think these things are real. From let's call it the Amerindian model, these things they're real. They're part of our environment. They have roles to play, just like animals have roles to play. We have roles to play on the planet. We're here for reasons. So I take that approach. And I think just discussing it, and if it does come up, what to do. I have a way that was taught to me of how to be and what to say and what to do, and I do go over that with people. And
What does
and
that
just
look
to,
like, Wallace? Just out of curiosity.
oh, sure. Well, I would say this is wisdom that was given to me. Okay, I'm just a messenger here. Okay, so one is it doesn't have power over you, that you are in power, that it's there probably for a reason, or it was carried with something.
Mhm.
Two is acknowledge it. Don't be disrespectful to it. Acknowledge it. Maybe acknowledge the role it's played, because often you can, when you're in that state, you can tap in or ask it, what's your job? What, actually kind of speak with it. And then, hey, you know what? You can go now. And if it doesn't go, you can go now. Well, okay, you know, I'm done with you. You can speak to it like that. It doesn't have necessarily power over you. And I think to prepare someone for that when they're in that state, they're ready to do that, because it doesn't. And when you're healing, you can let it go.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
And it may be carried from, also to talk about it, maybe it's carried from generations.
mm.
So there are things that can be carried generationally, which means that you can have a conversation with it. You can say, I know what you've been here for. I want to thank you and acknowledge you for the job you've done. I know you had to do what you did, why you're here and everything else, but you can go now. And when you, one thing I learned was in Bali. One of the teachings that I'm gonna put into groups just for simplicity, but think of it like evil spirits, good evil spirits, evil good spirits, good spirits. There's kind of groupings, and when you realize that, and they're here, you can then approach it or speak to it in a certain way. The other thing is I think what's really also important, if that it's known these things are there. That's why shamans and in ceremony are so important. They go through 10, 15 years of training to work with these things and really help you release them. And they know how to work with them, no matter how powerful it is. And that's why it's so important to be in ceremony and be with people who know how to handle it.
Mm.
So I'm always wary. I mean, I'll give that, but if something's coming up, I often in clinical models they kind of don't, because there's a tight frame there. But if you're in a ceremony, there are people there that can handle that. I'm a baby. I'm a baby who birthed in that world, and you know, that's where I'm at. I'm aware of it and all that, and there are others much more knowledgeable and trained in everything than me.
Yeah.
I humbly look to them for any guidance
Well,
or
this
any
whole
help they can
work
give
is
me.
around bring forth humility, right? We really have
Yeah.
to have deep humility,
Mhm.
because we don't know what we don't know, right? We can't claim to know everything at the same time.
Not at all. Yeah.
Um, just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I have two questions for you. One is, are there specific conditions or mental health issues for which psychedelic assisted therapy has shown promising results, and
Oh,
particularly in the research that you looked at?
can we say it all? I think it goes back to what I just said, being able, trained to be able to work with whatever comes up.
Mhm.
Now, there are people doing deep research right now in working with, very, complex personality disorders, and, and doing the research on that and how to work with psychedelics with that. Super valuable research. It's going to help a lot of people. Now, there are communities. I always think of iboga. I don't have a relationship with it. I know people that work with it, and I've done readings and research on people that in communities there. And this is true actually among many Indigenous communities, that when people have these very complex disorders, I mean, we're talking schizophrenia, complex, when there's different personalities and everything, they work with the medicine with those people, and they honor them and bring them in, and actually bring in their gifts that they're bringing in. So they're trained and able to do that. And I think that's the real key. I think much like it can be a catalyst, as we've been discussing, for healing and writing relationships in any capacity. The key is having the knowledge and skill to work with those people in that context. I think that's super, super important. I'm a For all that we've chatted about today, I take a very go slow to go fast approach. Very mindful of each step. Sometimes just no, we just stay right here. We're not going to move anywhere. And I think that's really important. And um, I think that needs to be done. And it also gives credibility to all the communities that already know how to do this. And we're not often in engagement or conversation with them. They've been doing it for centuries. They're familiar with all of these different conditions or different things, and they know how to work with them.
Yeah,
So
that's
I think that's really important. Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful. That leads
Yeah.
me to a perfect segue to my last question. How does cultural and historical context influence the use of psychedelics and cannabis in traditional healing practices? And how can we respect these origins while also integrating it into modern therapy?
Uh-huh. Well, there's a lot of good research with all the psychedelics. I would say with, ironically, I think there's a lot of citizen data and different things that's being used with cannabis, but there's not a lot of clinical trials, that really, with different sample sizes and everything, that really can show cannabis in that sense. So I just wanted to state that about cannabis. That being said, cannabis, along with all of these things that we've been talking about, are very old, and people have been using them for a long, long time. So because of that, we have all of this knowledge that can be brought in to how to use it. And I think that's I think really, really important to think about. Um, and often we don't, I mentioned already, we don't get in conversations about how it can be used for certain conditions. And actually, do you mind asking the question again? I feel like
Well,
I answered on track, but I want to make sure I
same thing,
answered.
right? It's like you're talking about how can we bring in and get in communication with
Yep.
those that have been utilizing these medicines for thousands of years, for generational, you know, what do you propose? Like, how do you integrate? How do you even begin to have these conversations
Mm.
with those in the indigenous communities? And how do you bring that in a really respectful way, integrating that into modern therapy?
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, just do it. I mean, that's so, you just get in a conversation and do it. There are things, I think I mentioned them, uh, different research, the citizen data, et cetera, but it's really about going to those communities and speaking with them and seeing how they're doing things. Now, they're doing practices and different things that are working now. Like, for example, I talked about there's a whole bunch of meaning and things in the set and set outside going on that are absolutely influencing the effects of the psychedelic in plant medicine. Every shaman, every community or team that's from these communities knows that. It's ingrained in them, that they breathe it. It's just the truth. That's not often brought in. So I think by having conversations with them and everything else, we can do that. Now, will we? Because we have a frame that says the chemical affects us. We have to do a clinical, we have to do it, and we can only stay in that, this truth, and then the trials and all the peer-reviewed data built on itself. It's fantastic because it's really solid. But that also means it negates out the other stuff. So I think just having that, anyway, as I said, having that conversation and working with them, I think is one. And two is I think a lot of people in the field should actually go and not just there, but attend different ceremonies, go to different communities and see how that's working. Actually listen to people who've gone through the experience in a community and just listen. There's a lot of studies of marginalized communities, people with disabilities, how they're never spoken, they're never asked, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I can send you studies on that. I've read them. I incorporated in the paper I did. They're just not asked. They're never included. And I think we need to do that. There's too many examples where they're not.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah. So being in conversation with the indigenous communities,
Hmm.
listening and participating in
Hmm.
those indigenous settings, and
Yes.
finally just coming with deep humility to this work.
Hmm. 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 And we're all on territory. Well, not all. In the Americas, we're all on territories of peoples that
Mm.
have vast knowledge of plants, ceremony, and relationship with nature and different things, and we can learn from that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Wallace. This has been a very enlightening, enriching conversation.
Thank
We
you.
are honored to have you here with us and really
Mhm.
appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here.